spring break, and we were very excited about this event, so I appreciate y'all coming out, and hopefully power doesn't go out or anything like that. Got a ceiling tile over here that may give at any moment, but that'll just be a water feature to the night. So a little bit about State of Enloe. I was super excited when I came to Enloe in 2021. This tradition was not started by me, but this is an incredible tradition here at Enloe, and some of the topics that we've covered over the past years, we did school safety, which was very timely, and certainly something that was heavy on the hearts and minds of the school staff as well as the parents. And so we had all kinds of members of our community as well as our school system come and speak about school security. We have had a panel discussion on teacher recruitment, which was huge coming out of COVID. That was for sure on everyone's mind. Then we last year, I believe, did a panel on mental health, because that's something that has been very important to all of us. So we had folks from the community talking about resources you can access in the community, what resources are available within the school system, and then how to take care of our mental health so that we can be taking care of our kids. So this year, one of the topics that has come up in Coffee Talk has been, we all love public education. We believe in public education. We understand what a value and an asset it is to our community. I know a lot of us in this room were living in North Carolina when Jim Hunt was governor, and we were first in the nation in education, and RTP was thriving because everybody wanted to move to North Carolina because the schools were so great. And so at our coffee talks, one of the things that has been a topic of conversation is like, what can I do, right? And I had all these ideas about making t-shirts and walking downtown, saving public schools, but these are the elected officials that are behind the scenes. I don't know if I can say if it's behind the scenes, or not really behind the scenes, but they're in it, right? And they really understand the mechanism of how policy happens, and they understand what is effective in making change happen. So we have them here tonight to let them express to us, as people who care and love public schools, what can we do that will make a difference beyond just when we all get together and say, we love public schools. So we have this wonderful panel of elected officials. We have Chris Heagarty, who you all know is your school board chair. Did you know he also has a child? We have Representative Julie von Haefen, also a parent at Enloe. We have Senator Jay Chaudhuri, also a parent at Enloe. And my neighbor.
Yes. And one coming next year.
And we have the amazing Dr. Elena Ashburn, who was my boss, but now represents Governor Stein's office. She works for him as his advisor for education policy. She's also a parent. And we have Sarah Crawford, also a representative and Enloe parent.
Wow.
Right? How about that?
Wow.
So Enloe must be Isn't that great?
Yeah.
So when I was teaching 4th and 5th grade at Bug, we would start with an essential question before we would do our units. So really the essential question for tonight, and I'll throw this out to the room, are you all okay with us going with the essential question of what is the most effective way that we as constituents can advocate for public schools? What will work? Does that sound reasonable? Does that capture the spirit of the room?
Yes.
Okay, so you all can take it one by one. Someone can volunteer to go first. And then we will try to keep it within an hour, because these individuals work really long hours and we don't want to keep them here all night. But let's try to have a hard stop at 7:30. Okay. Yeah. 7:35.
Go ahead. Representative on here.
I'll start. I mean, the first thing that I always talk about is, like Jordan said, how North Carolina has just really fallen since, honestly, 2011, when the Republican anti-public school majority took over our legislature, and has continually, what I call death of 5,000 cuts, done all these things over the last decade plus to erode our public schools, erode public trust in public schools, and divert funding away from them toward private school voucher programs. So if we really want to make the biggest impact on our public schools, in the very best way that you can do that is to elect pro-public school candidates. Because we, as people all in the minority party in the legislature, have no power, to be quite honest. We can't really do anything other than continue to speak out, to, fight against what's going on, but, we don't have the numbers. So if you want to make a difference and change this and turn the ship around toward people that are advocating and fighting and supporting and investing in our public schools, we just have to get more people there that are doing that. And that, and I know here in Wake County, we are in an area where there are a lot of pro-public school candidates and legislators and elected officials on all levels of government. So unfortunately, that sometimes means you have to go out of Wake County to help us elect those people in those seats that are flippable. And so, there's lots of organizations that help do that. There's NCAE is a great organization who will help direct you toward candidates that they're supporting, that support our public schools. But, honestly, that is the number one way. We've just got to get more people there that are doing the things that you all want as far as supporting our schools. So, any of this?
That's exactly right. I remember a conversation about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and it was a school board member, not Chris Heagarty down there, different school board member, and the board member called me and was so angry about the budget and how much it gutted public education, and this was before we did crazy amounts of money into opportunity scholarships, taxpayer funded private school vouchers, but it was still pretty bad. And she called, she was livid, she said, what do we need to say and do to convince the majority, who are Republicans, to convince Republicans that we need to fund public schools? And I laughed, and I said, there are no combination of words that we can string together that is going to change this. We have to change the people who are at the seats. And as Representative von Haefen said, this is, we're in a very blue area. We're in a very, big area. We've got a couple of seats here in Wake County that are flippable, so there are some opportunities to do that work in Wake County, up in the northern end of the county and in the southern end in the House. I think the Senate's all good now, right? Dang. So there are opportunities, but there are a lot of ways to get involved in that kind of accountability work across the state to help other people in other House and Senate districts understand what their member is doing in some pretty targeted areas where we can flip seats.
I'll round out the legislative perspective. We can turn it over to the executive branch and local school board. So I think in thinking about Principal Jordan's essential question, the way that I think about it, I think we've already heard an answer, is you want to try to recognize where the power lies in order to have influence. And one of the things to think about is also just think about what constitutes funding for public schools. And so it's 60% comes from the state, 22% comes from local, and 17% comes from the federal government. So if we think about the pressures that are already happening, right, both Representative von Haefen and Representative Crawford talked about the private school vouchers that are, what was it, $440 million? I mean, it's going to be upwards to
800. Last year's appropriation on this made me so angry that day. It was the angriest I've ever been. It was $644 million appropriated last year alone. It might have actually been $844 million, I think, last year alone. And then it's between 700 up to 850 million forever.
Right.
Forever.
Right. Which starts totaling to several $billions if you think about it. Programs that have no accountability no test scores, are discriminatory in nature, don't have to provide transportation. Just to put those numbers in perspective, I mean, to give a 1% teacher pay raise, where in a state that we rank, 43rd, generally in the low 40s on teacher pay raise, $50 million is a 1% increase for a teacher pay raise. So think what you can do with teacher pay just with that. So, I mean, so you've got the pressures that we're already feeling from the federal government and the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education, which Council School Board Member Heagarty can talk about, but $17 million that has been lost at the federal level. You got a General Assembly that continues to really starve public education. If a Republican were here, and I will make their argument for them, because we do have this debate on the Senate floor, and I think it can be kind of a sleight of hand, is they will argue that the absolute dollars have increased. And of course it's increased, because as the states increase, you generate more tax revenue, so you will see more dollars increase as far as dollars that have gone to public education. But the better measure to think about it is, I mean, a couple ways you can think about it. You can think about whether our public education budget is keeping track with growth plus inflation. You can think about what it constitutes as a part of our GDP, our economic output, which by some third-party outsiders would give us an F. You can think about it by teacher pay, and you can certainly think about it by per pupil spending, where we rank among the lowest, I think 48th in the country. So I think by those measures, we're clearly not meeting our goal as far as the funding measures are concerned. And so what I would say is, you've got the state, you've got the federal. I mean, Chris can talk about the local aspect of it. I think there's a lot of pressure on county commissioners and school boards who are making recommendations on how to fill the gap, because you're not getting the funding that we're getting from the federal and state level. And the last thing that I'll bring up to you, and Representative Von Haefen's been very vocal about this, and it's probably not something that you think about when you think about education, is what happens in the judicial system. Because we had a state Supreme Court that rendered a decision called the Leander decision that interpreted Article 1, Section 15 of the state constitution. We tend not to think about state constitutions. They're not really taught in civics class. You learn a decent amount of it in law school, but they said that every child in the state is entitled to a sound basic education. And the way they determined that is there was a third-party consultant that basically estimated the amount of dollars that we should get as a state. I think was upwards of $5.6 billion. There was a program that is still available, I think, where you can go into your school district and look at the resources that would come into Wake County alone if we adhere to that judicial decision. But the legislature thumbed its nose at the Supreme Court and said, we're not gonna follow this funding mandate, and now the Supreme Court is now headed by a different party, and so the courts are no longer an ally to public education. So I just share that because you can see the impact of where the powers are, whether it's at the state level, local level, or even with Supreme Court races.
Do you want to go? Or?
Why don't you go first and I'll wrap this up.
Okay. So what I'm going to say is probably not very popular, but I'm going to just lay it out there for you. We have a crisis in public education in the state of North Carolina. And I don't see our current advocacy improving it anytime soon. And I'm just going to put that out there. I've served very briefly in the legislature back when we had the majority. And before that, I'd worked in advocacy for most of my career prior to that. I think we have to do more than just say we need to elect pro-public school candidates. Because we've been electing pro-public school candidates here in Wake County for some time. They're strong, fierce advocates, but nothing is changing. You know, we can't be powerless. So how can Democrats be effective? And it is mostly a partisan issue. I know this is a nonpartisan organization, but if you look at the leadership of the legislatures and the parties, the party membership of the people that vote pro-public education funding and anti-public education funding. That's where most of this comes down on. If we say we are powerless until the majorities change and the majorities are being decided in districts outside of Wake County, that doesn't feel very empowering, does it? And, you know, Senator Chaudhuri is, and I'm not just trying to puff him up here, but he is one of the, I will say, wisest and most observant members of our state Senate. When he narrows focus on issues like our judiciary and judicial control, that's extremely important. If you look at the balance of the power in this state and how we've lost control of the legislature through strong campaigns and advocacy work, they've been able to allow the governor to at least have a chance of vetoing legislation. If every single member of the minority party votes to support the governor, and that's not always a guarantee. But then we've seen a judicial branch, and I've worked in our state's judicial branch. We've seen a judicial branch that, whether Republican or Democrat, partisan or nonpartisan, used to have a majority that consistently supported the rule of law and precedent. Sometimes that worked for Democrats, sometimes that worked against Democrats, but it supported the rule of law. And we have seen that change over the last 10 years to become fiercely partisan, as you have seen with the recent decisions over seating a duly elected member of that court. You've heard of banana republics. We've turned into a tobacco republic, where your advocacy and your voice is truly threatened. And I wish I had something better to say about that. But that's the situation that we're in. So what can we do about it? I think we have to rethink advocacy. I think, you know, to Senator Chaudhuri's points, you know, yes, real dollars have increased in terms of public education spending, but so has our state student population. You would be spending more, you know, even if you didn't adjust for inflation, and they're not adjusting for inflation. Duke Power is not holding rates steady from 2010. We operate over 200 schools in this district. We're one of the largest landowners in the district. We employ, you know, almost 20,000 staff and employees in this district. We can't look at, you know, numbers from 2010 and say, oh, things are going in the right direction, because we've just had an increase if that increase doesn't keep pace. North Carolina has 115 school districts. Each county has one, and then some counties might have smaller districts back before a lot of the districts integrated. So we have 115. In terms of dollar per student, Wake County ranks 114th in state money for our students. Some of that is because, despite what you might hear, we run a very tight, very lean, and I would argue understaffed administrative and central office. We're spending less per student on key, important, essential functions that we need to make a school system work. We have 5 plumbers. That's 1 plumber for every 50 schools in the district. We have an athletic department for 200 schools of 2 employees. We have, I mean, I could just keep going on and on about it. We are in Wake County. We have a county commission that generously provides additional funding for the schools. Even still, though, as large as Wake County is, we're not in the top 10 in terms of local school supplements. Some districts, Chapel Hill, Carrboro, have a local tax that supplements that in terms of their sales tax revenues. That could go a long way. Because the state does not fund our basic operating needs, and I told Representative Crawford I brought receipts and I brought notes.
I told him to blame the General Assembly.
You know, she gave me a green light on this, but, and some of you in advocacy know this, the state constitution provides that education funding, operating funding, it is the policy of the state of North Carolina to provide from the state revenue sources, the instructional expenses for current operations of the public school system. It is the policy of the state of North Carolina that the facilities requirements for a public education system will be met by county governments. All right? Two different sources of funds. School board doesn't raise any money. Local municipalities don't raise money. Some of them used to have red light cams that would give us a little bit, but most have phased those out. When the state does not provide enough money, it falls back on our county to provide for our operating costs. To supplement this, so teacher salaries, the same teacher salary that you would struggle on in Chowan County or in Clay County is not going to get you very far in Wake County at all. So we supplement all of our staff. You know, we have a local supplement that's paid for by the county. However, that's becoming a larger and larger part of our county expenses and a larger and larger part of your property tax bill. So in terms of county, WCPSS is part of the county's budget. It's grown 3%, 9%, 8%, last year 9%. Last year we got the largest increase in the history of Wake County in terms of additional money for WCPSS, $58 million. It was a 9% increase over the previous year, which was an 8% increase over that. By the county spending that much money to supplement operational needs, we don't have as much to take care of facilities needs. And you all see this. Politically, when boards of education and others have to make decisions, we want to support teachers in the classroom. We want to support those great educational tools, all of the fantastic technology you see, all of the great innovative programs. But at the end of the day, we have to keep ceilings repaired. We have to keep HVAC running. There's enough money in Wake County to do that. But we're using that money in the classroom, where a lot of us say we should, but by putting it into the classroom, we don't have enough. And it's at the point where Wake County's government is about to cry foul and say the money, we have a constitutional obligation to take care of facilities, so the money we give you is going to be earmarked for facilities and nothing else. Or it's going to be such a high percentage, right, that'll result in more classroom cuts. Because, again, it's not their job. They do this because they know voters in Wake County support public schools and support public education. Senator Chaudhuri, again, very prescient, talked about other pressures. We used to rely on a certain amount of funding from the federal government. Wake County Public Schools have over 20,000 students that receive special education services. If you took just the special education services students out of Wake County, they'd be the 10th largest school district in the state by themselves. And yet with the defunding of the Department of Education, it's restructuring, the promise, well, we'll move important programs elsewhere, all of those students could lose funding that they get federally through IDEA. The magnet school program. I don't have to tell you about the magnet school program as Enloe parents. Wake County is nationally the #1 recipient of magnet school funds. All of those funds from the federal government could go out the door and are proposed to. Title I, the funds that help us take care of the most vulnerable, economically vulnerable students and provide them the additional supports in their schools. Project 2020 and the Heritage Foundation have said that all phases out. And important human services that would be paid for through Medicaid that would go to Wake County are being eliminated. And so Wake County, which has been our lifeline, trying to make up the shortage of cash coming from the state, we've been relying on Wake County. Wake County is facing their own federal funding cuts, in addition to declining tax revenues because of inflation and because of the economic situation. So, folks, we're in a bad spot. And I think it's important to provide that context. To get back to the original question, and I apologize, Elena, I really do. I've been on a little bit of a roll. I think in advocacy, my philosophy is that, you know, we have to change minds. We have to change hearts and minds. And we can't keep doing the same thing and expect anything to change. If Wake County is in the majority political opinion in terms of funding public education, we don't have the power, honestly, I don't believe, to change the rest of the state. So how do we change the minds of the people that are there? I will say that this year, and you know, some of our House members may have noticed this, even on those rural Republican districts, they've elected more representatives who come from school boards and have school board experience. And so we've noticed this year an uptick in legislation in the State House that, while I wouldn't call it pro-public education, has been better than what we've seen from some of Senator Chaudhuri's colleagues in the Senate. We've seen proposals for higher teacher pay come out of the House than the Senate. We've seen proposals to, like through different budget provisions, to address individual funding needs. And so there's a crack in the door. So what can we do? I think it's important that when you advocate, you make sure all of your facts are correct. It's easy to be passionate, but if you come in with incorrect information, you lose your credibility. If you come in confrontational, you shut people down. Doors close and people don't want to listen. In my time as an advocate, before coming to the legislative or the school board seat, my best tactic would always prove the most effective was you try to identify important interests, common interests. What is it that how will what you want also serve the interests of other people? Here, in a lot of these districts, the schools might be the biggest employer in some counties. You know, these schools, the North Carolina School Boards Association has a Republican majority membership, because if membership is based by counties, there are a lot more red counties than blue counties. If we can go, and if I can't get into a senator's office because he doesn't give a squat about Wake County, but I have a friend who's a Republican school board member from a Republican county, and I can get him to introduce me and bring him in, it can help. It can be effective. We can get the foot in the door. This means reaching out to people outside of Wake County. And it means, I think, tempering an argument to try to, you know, I know that I can't convince the Republicans in the House and Senate to fully fund, and maybe not even adequately fund, public education. But if I can find a few that are willing to give more, that's progress. And we're in a position in a crisis where I can't say that I'm going to hold out for the whole enchilada, right? I have to take whatever progress I can get, because our children and our teachers and our staff depend on that. And so some people may not like if I stand up next to a Republican and thank them for whatever meager scraps we get. But I'm gonna do what I have to do to make sure we get every possible dollar for our students. So that's my piece.
Hey y'all, it's great to see you. I want to clarify one thing. I am not an elected official. I'm very much a practitioner at heart. Was a teacher, a Teach for America teacher in Durham, fell in love with teenagers and decided to make education my calling. Was a principal, area superintendent. So glad to be with you all tonight and glad for the opportunity to serve in our governor's office. So I'm going to go back to the original question. The question was, what can I do, right? What can I do? And call me Pollyanna, but I really, truly, fundamentally believe in the power of people to organize and come together. I just really do. So one of the things that I do in my role is I work with the School Boards Association. And the School Boards Association recently did some work with Neiman Collaborative with polling North Carolinians. And one thing that they found specifically about public education is that people overwhelmingly love their classroom teacher, their principal, and their school. Overwhelmingly. But they've had this significant change in their overall feeling about public education, right? That's a really interesting dichotomy there, right? Why is it that people are overwhelmingly pleased with their kid's teacher, principal, and school, but they feel this sense of like dread or like there's a crisis in public education? So a lot of what the panelists have said about thinking about advocacy in a different way, I'm not sure I know the answer, but I do fundamentally believe that if people come together, think about advocacy in a different way, that maybe there are some clues in that data that they discovered, right? And part of that might be the narrative and engaging with people more directly in their local communities, and then having that spread across the state, right? Reframing that narrative that, like, I'm worried about public education at large. Well, why is that if you're so pleased with your local public school, right? How can we kind of fix that narrative and change that narrative? I also, as an educator, because I'm very much an educator, would say, like, I think that educators also bear some responsibility in that. Like, we've got to think about how we are promoting that teaching is a fantastic profession, that going into the classroom is something that is noble, that should be revered, as our superintendent says, and something that our kids should choose as a career path. So those are just a couple of different things that the other panelists didn't talk about that I wanted to lift up. We have another essential question.
Well, I think, I wonder if our audience might want the opportunity, now that they've been able to digest your comments, I see some heads nodding, to ask some clarifying questions or some follow-up questions.
I don't have a question so much as a compliment to Rep. Julie Von Haefen for your social media posts, because I do think one of the best ways to get this word out to people, because there's so much information out there that's inaccurate. There's so much that I think people feel disconnect from the representatives, and I do appreciate that you make an effort to get your voice heard on the internets, which can feel very passive, but I do think it's really powerful, and I think especially our young people need things like that and are looking for that. So, and I also just want to thank all of you for all of your service, for the work that you do.
Collectively, you kind of touched on the issue of representation in different parts of the state. I mean, how big an impact do you feel like some of the gerrymandering has had in terms of weighting our votes, I guess? Like, do you think that's a big factor in what's going on now?
Yes.
Massive amount.
Yeah, I mean, if you look across the state, more people across the state chose the Democratic candidate, or I would say the pro-public education candidate. We don't want to be partisan, but yet that is not reflected at all in our General Assembly. I mean, not at all. The Senate is in a super minority. The House is just barely broken the supermajority, and so I think it's a huge impact. And I think we've heard a lot about gerrymandering, but I think it's just important just to level set. So, what has happened in North Carolina, just to again, make sure everybody's on the same page, is that the legislature has the power to draw maps, and we are supposed to draw maps fairly. You have some rules you have to abide by around every district has to be proportional, you have to be contiguous, you have to try not to break up counties or break up municipalities when you can. So there's kind of this set of rules that we have to follow, but we have so much data out there that's available about individuals and what their likely voter behavior is based on a whole bunch of data that is all publicly available and kind of warehoused, that politicians are able to basically pick their voters and draw these maps that disproportionately give an advantage in one way or another to a certain political party. And and just to be clear, Democrats have done it, Republicans have done it. So this isn't like just the Republicans have done it and it's really bad, although that is true, but Democrats have done gerrymandering as well, so.
One thing that is different, though, is that the level to which gerrymandering can take place now
Yes,
goes unchecked.
correct.
Again, talking about the importance of the judiciary. The United States Supreme Court, which used to review many of these cases and could decide that blatant political gerrymandering was unconstitutional has now said, no, we're not gonna address a political issue, that goes back to the states. And so then if you have a state Supreme Court that has shown blatant extreme partisanship, and I'm a defender of the courts, and I'm telling you that we have one that shows blatant extreme partisanship, you're not gonna see these just egregious redistricting cases overturned.
And I'll just add that the reason that gerrymandering affects public education is because when you elect people into these seats, I think right now there's only literally, at least in the House, I think there's only about 20 seats out of 120 that are seriously competitive. So that means that people are making decisions and they have no accountability, because there's no risk that, even if there are people in their districts that are like supporting public schools and going to talk to them, and I love Chris's very positive attitude about, that we can convince, I think Jay and I have been and Sarah have been in the legislature too long at this point, because I'm very cynical when it comes to whether we can actually change people's minds, because that's all we've been trying to do for 10 plus years, beating our heads against the wall, and it's not working. So that's why my number one thing is we've got to get them out. But gerrymandering is a huge issue because sometimes there's no way to get them out. And that's why the judiciary, going back, is so incredibly important for public schools, because Leandro and making sure that we have fair maps, those are all, that's why they fought so hard to beat Allison Riggs, because if she would have lost, we would have lost the courts for years. And so now we actually have a chance to take back the court in 2030. And I know that seems like a long way off, but it's not.
I did have a question. While the discussion has been about the county and the state, I'm wondering, are there examples from other states that you can look towards for models of how things do change for better or worse, and what kind of futures those might suggest, even in a grim climate?
I think about that sometimes, but the way leadership in the General Assembly exercises its power is very different in one state versus another. A lot of leadership is personality based. I think it's safe to say that there's been a tradition. People don't realize this, and no offense to Governor Stein, I'd probably say this to him if he were here. But people don't realize that the governor in the state of North Carolina is one of the weakest governors in the country. If you look at political scientists who have done studies of the power that the governor has, the gubernatorial powers are very weak. And the reason that it's explained is that because as one of the original 13 colonies, there was always this inherent belief that we should be able to elect people, and people that are closest to their communities or legislatures. We elect everything, right? We elect Supreme Court justices. The Senate and the House are elected every 2 years. Most state legislatures, the Senate have longer terms than the House. But the power is disproportionately lies with the legislature. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, because when Governor Stein gives the State of the State address, which was a great State of the State address, and talked about the importance of increasing teacher pay, when he introduces his budget, the joke in the General Assembly is that they use it as a doorstop, because they may pick and choose a few ideas, but they're gonna write an entirely new budget in which the governor, as long as his veto carries no weight, is basically ineffective. And so, getting back to, I'll say, let me answer your question. Getting back to answer your question, one of the things that I've been thinking about is where there may be, there are issues that split Republicans, such as legalization of medical marijuana. There's great interest in that. Casinos and gamblings, if you might have read about. So there's a split in the Republicans where you have evangelicals that do not want any kind of gambling. Part of the reason gambling becomes important for the state is as we continue to cut corporate tax cuts and personal income tax cuts, they have to find revenues for other places. Their caucus cannot pass gambling on their own. They have to have Democratic votes. The grand bargain to me would be, well, if you want medical marijuana legalized, or if you want casino and gambling, that has to be a dedicated stream that has to go into public education. Now, whether our Democratic colleagues would agree on that, I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna pose that question to my colleagues here, and it kind of goes to what Board Member Heagarty was talking about, is like, what do you take as a compromise? But you have seen that in other states where you can find a dedicated, stream for providing public education.
But I will say that that's what they try to do with the lottery.
Yeah.
And the lottery is a scam because it does not put money directly towards schools. Don't believe the commercials that you see on TV.
Well, and that was done all by Democrats,
Yeah.
right? That was
I
done by
know, that's
Democratic
what I'm
legislatures. Last thing I will say to kind of illustrate the importance of the veto, which we haven't talked about as we get back to power. So, I mean, I'm going to let the House members talk about the politics in the House. This is very much inside baseball as to whether there are enough House Democrats to sustain the governor's veto. They should, because on its face there are enough Democrats to sustain the governor's veto. I have served in the legislature half of my time being in the super minority, half of the time where we were just in the minority and we could sustain Governor Cooper's veto. It is night and day in the ability to bring the Republicans to the table. And so when you look at increase in public education, guess what? It's actually about sustaining Governor Stein's veto. And so I say this really more as a political statement, is that when you think about 2026, you want to think about really the short-term goal is to make sure that one party has enough influence to bring the other party to the table so that we can increase public education. And so that would hold true in the Senate, where we are shy by one seat. That probably in the House means they need to pick up additional House Democrats, because that can make a real difference too. Last thing I will say, and I actually think this is such a great panel with Representative Von Haefen and Representative Crawford, who's really always Senator Crawford to me because she served in the Senate. But I don't think most folks have no idea what it takes to run for office in a competitive state House seat or Senate seat. Anybody have any idea, like in the state Senate, how much it costs to, how much each side will spend? So does anybody know what our salary or base salary is at the General Assembly, which is supposed to be a part-time job? $13,900.
$951.
So how much, does anybody know how much you spend to win like a state Senate seat? I don't know what.
I know that Yvonne Hopkins was asked to raise $1 million for her House seat last year.
Yeah, so it's almost what, $2.5 million on the
To be competitive.
in the Senate side, and that's an insane amount of money that nobody can raise in their right mind, and just the influence of money in politics. I mean, this becomes much more of a civics lesson, but you know, it's what's called hard money and soft money or dark money. I think the one thing, I think ProPublica has done some work on this. One of the reasons I think we've seen a huge push in private school vouchers is because there's what's called a lot of dark money that's been put towards this. So it's for-profit education model, right? And that's why you see a lot of money that'll never be accountable, that'll never be transparent on campaign finance reports that have been pushed into, you know, mostly Republican caucuses that are then used against another party candidate that is running.
So let me give you some hope. There are many states in the United States, you said to look beyond North Carolina, where you have Republican majorities in the House and Senate and Republican governors that pay their teachers a lot more and that invest a lot more in public education. So it doesn't have to be a partisan issue. It's just the way it's ended up here. If you look at some of the reddest states, Mississippi, there's one there, but I was going a different direction. Like Texas and Florida. Texas pioneered many of the school vouchers, but now they're seeing a revolt in the Republican rural counties because they all looked around and realized they don't have any private schools, and you're just taking money and subsidizing the big urban areas, and they've had enough. You know, Texas and Florida pioneered a lot of the testing and accountability for school grades. You know, right now we have these grades that come out that are supposed to judge how well our schools are doing. And they have two main components right now, you know, performance and growth. And even in the states that pioneered this, they said, well, performance, you know, what your final test grade was important, but growth is important. We want to show improvement. North Carolina, it's not like that at all. You don't have that balance. Everything is weighted just toward performance. which in an area, poor areas, rural areas, areas with a lot of families that face more challenges coming into school, those numbers are weighted lower. So it just makes all of our schools look like they are far less performing than they would be if you stacked them up against schools around the country. If you take schools and you take the graduates in Wake County and you stack them up against graduates in these other counties, in these other states, and you look at SAT and ACT scores, you look at college admissions, you look at scholarships earned, we are producing a high quality product in our schools. And if you look at these performance grades, you'd think we were very literate. So Republicans in other states can and have done a better job.
Back there.
Thanks. I just didn't want to let something go unsaid because we have everything here but a Congress member that speaking of the money influence and gerrymandering, a few years ago, the U.S. Congress came only a couple of votes short of outlawing gerrymandering and making money in politics a lot less influential. So that can be done very close, have been very close to doing that at the congressional level. So that's something that doesn't have to wait till 2030 for a Supreme Court to flip. So
And to that,
there's more than one way to skin a cat.
to that point, Congress has a very narrow majority right now, and they're looking at budgets. We have a brand new freshman congressman in Wake County. Okay? A lot of the schools in his district, and therefore a lot of the families in his district, will be directly and negatively impacted by the proposed House budget. The Department of Education cuts. If not all, almost all of the schools that will lose magnet grant funding under this proposed budget are in his congressional district.
Chris, can you name him, please?
His name is Brad Nye.
He does cover Wake County, so he might be your congressman.
He could be your congressman, depending on where you live in Wake County. He has thousands of families that will be affected by these cuts, families that have special education students. And really, I mean, I can't believe that anybody has to argue about the legitimacy of funding children with important developmental needs. I mean, if anybody should be funded, if there's any common ground to be had, it ought to be right there, right? The Restart schools that we have, our Title I schools, a large number of them are in eastern Wake County, in his district. So if you're looking for someone who might be persuadable, who you can show a common interest in, or you can show someone a common interest in, he would be one to target in terms of federal spending on our schools in the federal budget that would directly impact Wake County.
Go ahead.
Are you allowed to speak?
Yeah, I know, I'm like, I don't know.
She's a ringer.
I want to piggyback on something that Chris kind of just said, but since 2011, one theory of the case that I've had is that if we had a pro-public school board and a pro-public school county commission, we in Wake County could negate some of the effects of the budgets that were going to be cut at the state level. And I think with some of the tax increases you referenced a little while ago and the increases in public education funding here in Wake County, that's held true. So with 14 years behind us now doing that kind of work, has Wake County become sort of a beacon on the hill in terms of our neighboring counties or other counties around the state, in terms of that's what I want my school system to look like. That's what we should aspire to be. The achievements that you referenced just a few seconds ago, I'm like, as a Wake County public school advocate in this room, is it helpful for us just to tout what we got going on here in Wake County to all the other counties in the state with these other members and everything else, to show the disparity of the outcomes if you invest in public education and what we're realizing here in Wake County versus what Granville County is seeing or what Hope County is seeing?
I'm processing.
Fair.
I'm not sure that I understand Wake County and Wake County Public Schools, I will argue, are doing better than most every other school district in North Carolina, despite being 114th out of 115 in state funding per pupil. In Franklin County, they fired all of the librarians in the entire school district because they couldn't fund them. In Durham, they were only providing bus service 4 or 5 days a week, and then able to restore the 5th day, had to like back up how far from the school you had to live in order to get funding. But the truth is that we don't receive enough money to operate public schools, period. And all the money that we give in Wake County still falls short. Every new school we open runs a deficit. One of the reasons why this year's budget was so bad is that we're opening 4 new schools. We had to ask for about, I think between, and I might be conflating 2 numbers, $12 and $17 million more from the county just for operating costs, just to open those new schools that we needed for growth in Wake County. And we've found a way for all of that time in those years to keep the ship afloat with duct tape, baling wire, and some stuff you don't want to know about. We've kept a good public appearance, but on the back end, we are in crisis. We have deferred maintenance needs. We've tried to put everything into educational outcomes, and it's been like paying the minimum on our credit cards, right? Schools and systems that have a 20-year lifespan aren't getting serviced and aren't getting renovated, so it might be 30 years. If we, with 200 schools, and assuming they were all built in the same year, they're not, but it's easier math this way, we should be renovating 10 schools a year. We renovate about 3 or 4. And so when you talk about how great we're doing in Wake County, I mean, I want to accept and take those accolades, but I don't know if I can responsibly go out and hold us up as a shining example, because I know where the holes are, and I know where we're falling down and where we're deficient, because we don't have enough money, whether it's state money or county money, right? So I'm.
But the other 90+ school systems must be doing worse.
But they don't want their face rubbed in it by Wake County.
Yeah, agreed.
I would
Come
also,
on now.
Yeah.
I would also say
You're not allowed to talk.
that it is, that Wake is a great county, and I'm proud to send my kids to Wake County schools, but it is, to be fair, the other 114 school systems have various needs and different challenges than Wake does in different ways. So it's not really a comparable, it's not an apples to apples comparison of our school system against the other 114. There are different challenges in rural school districts, smaller tax base, those sorts of things.
Just real quick, as far as like facility needs, there's an estimate that was done statewide that there's over $20 billion of statewide infrastructure needs at all 115 school districts. So I mean, Wake is not unique. We might have more, but every school district, I try to go to like as many school districts as I can see, and I went down to Robeson County last year and toured an elementary, middle, and high school. And if you want to see some needs, it is incredible. And that's what Leandro is really all about, and the fact that every school district should have exactly the same facilities and requirements. But I will say that Governor Stein, I don't know if Elena wants to talk about this, has called for a $4 billion school bond to be put on the statewide ballot. The legislature has continued to resist that for some unknown reason, which I do not understand, because it would benefit all of their districts and they could take credit for it, that like their school is gonna get X amount of money, so I don't know if you wanna say anything about that.
You covered it for sure. Our governor has called for a $4 billion school construction bond that would essentially allow the different tiered districts. So districts are tiered based on, counties are tiered based on their wealth. And so certain districts that are low wealth would have no match requirements. So they'd strictly just get the dollars. It would be a huge bonus, not just for their school infrastructure, but their local economy, right? So we see this as a win-win. And we continue to say over and over, let the voters decide if they want to approve the bond. Bring it to the voters for them to decide if they want to invest in their public schools. So that's something I would encourage you to advocate around, is bring that to the voters.
Representative Von Haefen, can you give that number again on what the appraised school needs were?
20 billion, I think that was what Governor Cooper's team said last.
Yeah.
In total needs.
Statewide.
5 years,
Statewide.
5 years
20
ago, it was 13.5
billion.
So it's probably.
And so the state senate budget did include an additional amount for school capital needs. Do you remember how much that was?
I actually do not.
Probably not.
He probably missed it. 700,000.
I was gonna say, I didn't think it was a million.
No. So just for scale.
Wow.
Well, but we have a lot of hope for the House budget.
But you see how it was an increase.
That's insulting.
It was an increase. So
I saw a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question, as one often does. So I have a huge problem with vouchers, and I'm starting to see this as more of an existential threat right here in Wake County. We are seeing another campus for Gibbons go up in Cary. That is paid for by all of us. I almost want to see a sign go up that says paid for you by taxpayers. Staley's Academy also expanding. And these are competitors for us. So I mean, I think that's just good to have in mind that this isn't just like money that is abstract, like we're seeing it in Wake County. And I would say that I did outreach and phone banking around HB 10 and called those counties that we're talking about to talk to folks. And it's shocking how few people understand this new model of voucher.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I guess my call would be for everybody to think about joining a group like Public Schools Strong, which will train you to do that kind of relational advocacy and help educate folks, because when they understand, oh, I don't want to give my money to Charlotte.
That's right.
Right? Like I'm in, Western North Carolina. I don't want to give my money to Raleigh.
That's right.
They do, you can move the needle. I guess my question was just if you have any perspectives on, like, is this whole corporate tax rate thing just a foregone conclusion? Because it boggles my mind that we are going to go to a zero, that you're going to have businesses that use all of our infrastructure and pay $0.
Right now, it is a foregone conclusion unless something changes in the budget. But yes, by 2030?
2030.
It is gonna go to zero. I was just at a job announcement for Holly Springs the other day, announced 450 new jobs to Holly Springs, multi-million-dollar investment, and I just kept thinking, they're gonna pay no taxes,
Well,
in a few years.
And the other thing we don't talk about is we are setting ourselves up for a structural deficit. So right now we're talking about not meeting spending needs, but then we're gonna be talking about spending cuts. I mean, the 2030 projection is like a $13 billion deficit in the out years if we continue on the trajectory of the personal income and corporate tax cuts.
There's a great graph that Office of State Budget and Management did to to go along with the governor's budget that kind of shows what the deficit spending, what that looks like in the out years, and I think
Right there.
it's like my favorite. It's my favorite graph. So just I want to make sure everybody knows. Like we passed, and I think it was the 2021 budget. We passed, not any of us here, but the General Assembly passed in the budget in state law that by every year the corporate tax rate is going to go down, and by 2030 it will zero out. We have 350 people moving to North Carolina every day on average. So I mean, I'm pretty good at math, and that math just doesn't seem to add up to me, even at its very basic level. So I think that's a huge thing that we should be talking about. And I tell everybody who comes to my office, and I had a slew of them today with their hands out for money. And I was like, I'm so glad you're here to ask me for money, ask me to put money in the budget, which I will happily try to do. However, you're probably not going to get it this year, and you're definitely not going to get it anytime in the future unless we stop this. And I think Governor Stein has done a really excellent job in his budget. He laid it out so well in his budget about what this could look like, what it should look like if we just freeze the tax cuts that are slated to go into effect. And I also just want to give the governor huge kudos, because I think he's done a really good job of building relationships with Republicans, and I think having served in the minority, he is coming from a place of understanding how to govern from the minority. And don't get me wrong, I also love Governor Cooper. So I want to say that too, but I think he's done a really good job of just reaching out across the aisle, and I've had some conversations with him about, I don't think there's room in the Senate for us to undo the corporate taxes there, but I do think that there is quietly interest in the House to do something differently. We're awaiting the House budget, so we'll see.
So just maybe for the House members to preview, so the House budget is gonna come out next week, right? Supposed
Yeah,
to.
we may have a preview
So-
tomorrow.
Right, so.
Education comes out tomorrow in the House.
So.
Say that again?
Education comes out tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow, 8:30.
So, I think Board Member Heagarty kind of previewed this, so I think the sense is, not that any of this will be enough, right? The public education funding in the House may be more than what is the Senate, and there was also rumors that the Speaker wasn't as interested in seeing the tax rates go
Correct.
through.
Correct.
So we may see that in the budget next week or this week.
Correct. I've had some conversations across the aisle, and that is my understanding, is that they don't really want to freeze the tax cuts exactly how we would do it, but they see the problem with, the legacy that you leave if you do that. Oh, there's this young lady's had her hand up for so long. I'll get to you.
I have a multi-level question. So, in looking at solution-based, because we know the problems, Wake County isn't an issue voting-wise, we're doing what we need to do voting-wise. So what is it that we can actually truly do to get the rest of North Carolina in order? And multi-level here. It's more than just education, because if it was just education, we would live in our cute little box and we could probably get that handled. It's about the corporations we're bringing in, it's about the housing that you're allowing, and it's about, as you mentioned earlier, gerrymandering. So how does that factor in? Like, how often can those lines be changed? Because I don't know. So how often can that be changed? How is it factored in when we're looking at the new communities that are being approved, that we know are not targeted to homeowners that are going to vote with our same beliefs in mind? Like, how is all of that being considered? And what can we do to get the other counties and municipalities in line to actually help Wake County?
That is a multi-level question.
Well, address the first one, the easy one first. How often do lines get drawn?
Well, by the Constitution, the line should be drawn every 10 years, although I think those of us in Wake County are probably pretty good testimony, because there's been so much ongoing litigation that's been referred to. So I've been in 5 different Senate districts in the last 5 terms.
Without moving.
Without moving, which I was actually put in with another Senate member who did move, and then I'll let the other members, like you have also been gerrymandered. You got put in with a member that ran for a House seat. So I will say that I think we're probably set with the seats that we've got probably for the next 4 years, and so really what becomes important, a lot of this discussion to me has to be around long-term thinking, and I think when you talk to your families and friends, like I would say 2 things, like you can't have this expectation that you're gonna have like an instant win in one election cycle and you're gonna be able to change the world. And anybody who studied the history of this country knows that the great movements, whether it's the 19th Amendment or the Civil Rights Act, these were several decades to try to get these changes. I hope we are not in that situation, because I think we are all impatient by nature, but I would say the magic number for us would be 2032, when you're gonna have new maps. And because of the criteria that Representative Crawford talked about, we are increasingly seeing more and more members coming from Mecklenburg and Wake County and urban districts, right? So you're gonna increase the number of representation that come from urban districts and suburban districts. So that's point number 1. And just as a reference to kind of give you a sense, we have 100 counties, but in the Senate, I don't know what it's in the House, in the Senate, between Mecklenburg and Wake County, we represent 20% of the senators. So 10 senators out of 50 come from those 2 counties alone. It's an incredible block of votes. I think number 2 that you were talking about is kind of, what do you do with those districts? Again, I think as Representative Crawford talked about, you have to hold members in competitive districts accountable. I think when Representative Von Haefen first ran, she ran against, challenged an incumbent, right? Right. So I'll let her tell that story. My favorite line in the kickoff when she decided to run was Governor Cooper was her special guest, and he said, if you can be the president of a PTA, deal with the PTA committee meeting, you can definitely deal with the legislature. Yes, so I don't know, maybe have candidates in your mind, exactly.
Are you running for office? She would be fantastic.
But what I would say is the northern and southern Wake County districts tend to be very competitive, both in the Senate and the House. Like if you're thinking about proximity and where you can help provide resources, door knocking, fundraising, those are races that you want to pay attention to. And then, I think more broadly speaking, which is, I mean, you really have to understand where the concentration of power is. So when you start looking at flip districts, like districts that are really competitive, then you start looking at neighboring counties to Wake County, for example, Franklin, Vance, Nash counties. I mean, these are districts that you could probably drive to be influential. You can make phone calls, but those districts become really important too.
I also mentioned that the legislature changed the way that our county commission is elected, and this coming up election in 2026 will actually be electing 2 more members of our Wake County Commission, and they're at-large members, and then all the other members will be just elected in the district that they live in. So this is a major change. And as Chris said, I mean, Wake County Commission is extremely important to Wake County schools. We have to elect, again, pro-public school candidates to the commission. So make sure that you're staying aware of those races, and they're coming up in March when we have the primary, because there's going to be a primary of multiple Democrats, multiple probably Republicans running for these 2 at-large seats. And so that is a really important change that you can tell your friends and neighbors about, because I don't think a lot of people know that that's changing this upcoming election.
So this is the part of Coffee Talk where Dan is usually my savior, because he's a lot better at wrapping things up.
We have a question here. We have a question here.
I'm with you, Sarah. We'll do one more question, is that okay? And then, since we're already over the limit, okay, all right.
Sorry.
And I'm sure they'll be happy to stick around afterwards.
They'll come thank me tomorrow.
Well, so first I want to thank everyone. Thank you all for your transparency and just for being here for the Enloe community. I will say that the more I learn, the angrier I get. For Chair Heagarty, you said we have a crisis and I don't see our advocacy changing anything anytime soon. And that's really disconcerting to me, because the PTA, the whole mission of PTSA is advocacy. So I want us to leave with some hope on something that we can do. But I did have a question. We are being asked, so the county commissioners are holding public hearings on the budget next week, and we're being asked to come out and share our voices, share our opinions, and the vote is on June 2nd. Is there anything that we can do? Anything that we can say that will have any kind of impact?
Yeah, absolutely. The county manager has recommended an increase in the county spending for Wake County Public Schools of $35 million. The budget passed by the school board was $40.3 million. We need every penny of that. We worked hard. When these budgets come out, they don't just come out of a black box, right? It's not just, well, the superintendent has come up with a number out of the air. We've been working with the county since 2024, looking at revenue projections, seeing these have been in flux with everything going on federally, but trying to get a good estimate for how much might be available, what the county's economic wealth and strength is. And so the superintendent had put together a budget, and the board reprioritized some items, but kept to the number that I am confident is within the means of our county to pay. Now, if we asked for everything we needed, we'd ask for maybe $90 million, and they would just say, well, that was great, thank you, and then give us the 35. it will be a stretch for them, for some of them individually, to go from their manager's recommendation of 35 to 40. But if they can provide everything that we've asked for, we can prevent cuts to the staff dental program. We can prevent the elimination of our maintenance and operations contracts. We can prevent reductions for our restart schools. If we get less, all three of those high priority needs identified by our Board of Education, cuts that were in the superintendent's budget, that we were able to reverse and put back in there, all of those items can be funded. But if it's less, it's gonna be even more painful than what we had to come up with. You know, with the costs of opening 4 new schools, all of the growth in Wake County, constantly chasing this growth and not having enough to pay for the school operations of each one of these new schools, takes up more and more of that money. So, you know, I've had 1 or 2 commissioners that have told me point blank, we're not raising taxes, we're not raising taxes. Well, they just passed a library bond, and so they have an obligation to raise taxes to pay the debt service on that bond, right? So I think they will potentially have a small tax increase. And the thing is, you know, in those margins, playing those games, looking at other areas where we can fund, can they find less than $5 million in the entire county budget to cover the gap? And so I believe it's a reasonable ask. I think we've done the hard work of looking at all of our school expenses and presented them a reasonable and achievable number. And so while we need more, I would encourage all of you to reach out to the county commission and ask them to fully fund the school board's ask.
You said that was 90 million? Oh, school board's ask. The school board's ask.
40.
90 million, right?